Hello. Today I'm going to talk to you about punctuality. And if you're ready, I'll begin. Dear friends, I have a confession. I have a problem arriving on time for things. I have a tendency to be late. And this is quite stressful for me, but I am aware that it's incredibly irritating for everybody else. However, I've recently become reassured because I know I'm not alone. A recent YouGov survey done in the US showed that 1 in 5 Americans is late for work at least once a week. Now, why is this? Are some of us simply hardwired to be late for things? Researchers have looked into this phenomenon, and they've come up with a bell curve. At one end of the bell curve, they have people who arrive on time for things, what they call timekeepers. At the other extreme, they have what they call time benders. Now, time benders are simply people who find it difficult to turn up on time. Now, I count myself among their number, and us time benders have a number of very interesting traits. We don't like routine, we don't like familiar tasks very much, and we get bored pretty easily. That said, however, we can work very well if we're interested in something and we get particularly engrossed. Another thing that we're particularly good at is working well to a deadline. In those circumstances, we can be incredibly efficient. Do you think this sounds like you? Do you think perhaps there's a psychological reason for our tendency to be this way? Psychologists have said that one of the key psychological traits of humans is conscientiousness. And they say you can work out how conscientious someone is simply by asking them a few basic questions related to perhaps how tidy they are. Doesn't sound good for me. How organized they are. And also how punctual they are. But maybe time benders, therefore, are just not conscientious. It's just not the way we're made. But surely there's more to it than that. Time benders, people who tend not to be on time for things, actually, it is said, experience time differently. Not every minute passes the same way for them. It feels like time shifts. This is because, as I said, they have a tendency, for example, to be particularly engrossed in certain tasks. And under those circumstances, they don't really notice the passage of time. And I'm not just making this up. Research has been done on this. Serious tests have been carried out on groups of people. What they did was they took a group of, say, 10 candidates, they put them in a room and gave them a particularly engrossing task to complete. I don't know, a jigsaw or something like that. Although these people did have access to a clock, a clearly visible clock on the wall, it was the case that the time bender types tended not to notice the clock, to ignore it once they'd become fully engrossed in their task. So the conclusion we can draw from this is that some people are much better at registering or noticing the passage of time than others. So none of it's our fault. But actually, when you think about it, and I know this applies to me as well, if I really have to be on time for something, I can be on time for something. I've never missed a plane, for example. I've very rarely missed trains. Although I'm always late, almost always late, dropping my children off at school or arriving at dinner dates. This is perhaps a little distressing for us time benders because it is indeed very revealing. It shows us that if there are consequences, real consequences, we can be on time for things, and that we tend to be late for things that don't matter, i.e. social engagements. And actually, when we think about it, this can be very hurtful for the people around us, in our circle of friends or in our family. But I think perhaps the positive conclusion to draw from this is the power of deadlines. And if you're serious about improving your punctuality, you have to set yourself real deadlines, which are external and have real consequences. Social expectations here too play a very important role, and often a negative role. They make things worse. I think perhaps we all have fairly fantastical ideas about who we are and what we are, and we may just be the sort of person who likes to think of themselves as, I'm just a late person. I tend to be late for things. But can often turn into a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's actually self-sabotaging in many cases. And one of the most exciting recent developments in psychology is the possibility for us to actually, to some extent at least, change our personality. Not everything is set in stone. We are malleable. One example is that we can become more conscientious if we adopt a number of different traits that conscientious people have. Sounds obvious. We do need to make an effort at first, though. We need to draw up a daily plan. We need to tidy our desk 2 or 3 times a day, and just make sure all these habits, which are natural to people who are already conscientious, become ingrained in us as well. So time bending, therefore, is part of our personality. And as we've seen, experiments have been carried out which demonstrate the fact that people experience the passage of time somewhat differently. But this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to remain the late one. And by the way, if there's no late one in your group of friends, well then it's probably you. Setting meaningful deadlines and then having real consequences if you don't meet those deadlines is something that will help you become more punctual, because we know you're on time when it matters. And then we can also retrain our behaviour and alter our personality. This sounds a little disturbing. We're only talking about tweaking it a tiny bit to consider other people and relieve your stress a little bit. Anyway, I had so much more to say on this subject, but I'm afraid I'm late for my next appointment, so I'm going to have to leave it for now.